Good afternoon to everybody, and first of all, let me take the opportunity to congratulate all of you for this marvelous event in this very important day, and I'm really honored to be here with you. Now, my unpronounceable name and surname has already been spelled out, so we can go ahead with that. And actually, what I would like to talk to you about is, that's the wrong one, is about knowledge and innovation. I believe if you're here, I don't have to convince anybody about how important knowledge is and how important innovation is. And we know that knowledge plays a crucial role in economic progress, and also that innovation is at the heart of what is called the knowledge-based economy. Now, this increasing recognition of what is innovation and its importance within economic growth and structural change has, at the end of the day, drawn attention to what is the nature of innovation, what is the role of innovation, and what are especially the determinants of innovation. Because at the end of the day, innovation is not important in itself. It's important if we know what is the relationship between innovation and economic aggregate performance. And what matters for us, especially at the OECD, is to be able to explain what are productivity differences across countries and try to inform policymakers about them to make even better policies. Now, as we all know inside here, innovation entails investments which are supposed to produce new knowledge. And these are the result of complementary intangible assets. That is not only research and development, but software, human capital, and organizational structures. Now, these forms of knowledge, including intellectual property, have been termed intangible assets. But what do we mean really by intangible assets? Well, it's a claim to future benefits that does not have a physical or a financial embodiment. So here you find the first difficulty in measuring them. And in a very seminal paper that nowadays is used worldwide in order to try and frame intangible assets, Corrado, Halton, and Siekel subdivided investment in intangibles into three main categories. The first one is computerized information, which is basically software and computer databases, whether you made yourself or you buy them. The second important category is innovative property. Now, here you see a very important intellectual property type coming out, and these patents, because it's what is typically the consequence of scientific R&D, although we well know that innovation is much more than R&D only. Then, in the innovative property category, Corrado, Halton, and Siekel put also mineral exploration, copyrights, here again, and other intellectual property, and license costs, and other product development, design, and research. As a matter of fact, the economic environment agrees nowadays that patents are a measure not of innovativeness, but of inventiveness, because there is a whole lot to be done after you come up with a patent to bring that patent to the market and make it a success. So that's why in innovative property, we also find other product development, research, and design expenditures. And finally, economic competencies, which basically means, yet again, another type of intellectual property in the form of trademarks, which typically constitute, not always, but very often, part of the branding strategies of companies. And then you find also firm-specific human capital, which seems to be a very important asset, which is complementary to all the other intangible assets, and organizational capital. Now, I don't think I have to explain to you what intellectual property is. And why, anyway, I think sometimes when we discuss about intellectual property, we sort of neglect what was the driver behind granting intellectual property in the first place. What we would like to solve, and what policymakers try to solve by creating something like intellectual property, was to try and address the lack of a probability constraint. That is, why should anybody invest in innovating if I can't get the result of it? If someone else would take a free ride on what I have created? And actually, this is something that I think should be kept in mind nowadays by the time we look at litigation, intellectual property for small and medium enterprises, vis-à-vis intellectual property for big firms, and the current discussion that we have heard today about. The other very important thing for the development of science and technology is disclosure. One of the most important aspects of the patent is that you get, as an inventor, a temporary monopoly over your invention, insofar as you disclose what you've done. So this is fundamental because then others can learn from what you've done and build on it and go further in development of technology. So as we have seen, this is just for 2006, but the picture is not very much different if we look at other years. In recent years, we have seen that investment in intangible assets have overpaced investment in tangible assets. And this is true for the countries you see, and this is true over time. So in many countries, especially United Kingdom and United States, it's been quite a long time since investment in intangibles were more important, have been more important than investment in tangible assets. Now, why do we care about what goes into investment in intangible assets? Well, because there seems to be a very strong relationship with productivity growth. So actually, in the jargon of economists, which always use very weird words and very difficult to make themselves more important, they've always spoken about multi-factor productivity. That is, we try to understand, it's years since economists have been trying to understand what drives economic growth. Now, we know that there is labor, which matters. We know that there is tangible capital that matters. But then what the regressions were not able to explain took the name of multi-factor productivity, which, according to Solow, is a measure of our ignorance. That is, we don't know where this growth comes from. Now, by the time you factor in intangible assets, and including, of course, intellectual property assets, then you realize that the measure of our ignorance decreases. That is, intangible assets do matter for economic growth. And that's the only reason why we bother about measuring them and trying to understand what is their relevance. Now, what do we do at the Directorate for Science, Technology and Industry of the OECD? Well, we have 5 major projects at present that try to address issues related to intellectual property. First of all, and very importantly so, we do patent statistics and develop indicators. Then we are developing an initiative which is called Microdata Lab, which is a big support for all analytical work we do. Then we have working parties, which is basically the experts working at the OECD that are working on firm dynamics, patenting activity, and measurement of intellectual property. Why is this important? Because it's the only way of understanding the values of IP for economic growth. And then we have 2 flagship projects that are a widespread OECD project. One is the knowledge networks and markets, and the other one is the new sources of growth. But I'll tell you more in more details now. So why do we do patent statistics? Because patents are one of the few sources of harmonized knowledge we have about inventiveness. Thanks God we have them, actually. And they are very helpful in order to address a whole set of questions, from technology performance to what can be emerging technologies, to looking at knowledge diffusion and technological change, to look also at the geographical properties of inventive processes, who is involved, where, how often, how difficult it can be. What is the role of university? I was hearing before the critique, the veiled critique to the role of universities and the importance of the so-called third function of universities. Well, if we were to factor in not only the patents obtained per R&D dollar invested, but also the publication that are later cited in patents, then very likely our consideration of the role of universities for technological development and economic growth would be much different. Then we also look through patents and the globalization of R&D activities. It's very useful and easy to look at how priorities are used to patent a patent in several patent offices. And then we can look at the patenting strategies of firms, and also, ultimately, our aim is also to look at the effectiveness of the patent system. Now, this is very much experimental work in progress, but I'm really happy to disclose it to you because the first publication containing this indicator will just happen in September. So watch out for the innovation scoreboard. Now, there is a key question nowadays everywhere in the world, that is, there are too many patents of low quality. How can we get rid of them? Well, to me, the question is, how do I identify patents of low quality, given that disclosure about economic value doesn't happen and doesn't happen on a constant basis, so comparisons are very difficult. So we rely on what is the literature, what the literature has found. And we use measures like forward citation, that is the number of citations a patent receives, backward citation, that is the citation that a document makes to prior art, then the patent family size, that is how many countries I'm protecting my invention in. Then we also use the number of claims that is supposedly, the more the claims, the more important invention. A generality index, which I will come back later, that is about the dispersion of citing patents. Basically, what the generality is saying is how much I have influenced not only my field of technologies, but other fields. And the grant lag. This is very new, because recent literature, 2010, we are talking about Regibo and Rocket, has found out a kind of revealed preference argument. That is, when a firm believes a certain patent is very important for itself, it files a very complete application, very thorough. It follows the development of the granting procedure very carefully. So as it turns out, and absolutely in contrast to what was believed before, the shorter it is take, the more likely that the patent is very important for the firm. So here comes your Korea performance with respect to the other OECD countries. So by the time the bar is higher than the diamond, you're a leader in there. So you are above what is the OECD average. So as you can tell, first of all, this picture tells us that in terms of quality, and quality here is a concept of both technological quality and approximation of economic value. So what it's telling you is that competition is very tight. On average, competitors are very close. So the average of the OECD countries is very close to what is, for instance, the level of Korea. Now, a part of this indicator, as I was mentioning, is the patent generality index, which, as I said, measures the dispersion, that is, to what extent I was able to influence more than one sector on the basis of what I did as an invention. Now, here you'll be very, very happy to see that Korea, as it turns out, is world leader in 5 out of 39 classes. And these are basic communication, telecommunication, digital communication, electrical machinery, and audiovisual technologies. In the last case, together with Canada. So indicators like this can be very important in order to try and assess where you want to go, where your strengths are, and how to progress. The only drawback here is that these kind of indicators will not tell you, by the time you file an application at the patent office, whether that application has quality or not. You will have to wait at least 5 years to be able to see what happens with that application and having an assessment of its quality. The other initiative we have is the Microdata Lab. That is, we are linking firm data, patent data, trademark data, and scientific publication data. The reason is we want to understand how knowledge is created, who appropriates it, how that happens. Are there small firms? Are they big firms? How long it takes? What is the churning? That is, firms that enter and exit the market. How that relates to, for instance, allocative efficiency. Allocative efficiency is a concept that tells you to what extent firms that are more productive manage to get a bigger market share, which is something that all policymakers should be very interested in. Now, in this respect, for instance, we have been doing some work that links patent and trademark, and this is very original because no such databases exist. And why do we do that? Because, as we know, patents only manage to proxy technological innovation, or mostly so. Whereas trademarks can signal, not always, but seem to be a very good proxy, the literature suggests, with respect to product innovation, whether involving technology or not, process innovation, marketing innovation, both in the form of new firm focus, that is, I launch a new whole bunch of services and products, and I trademark it so that the customers can recognize it's me and not my competitor, and they come and buy my products. Or new target markets. That is, okay, I used to be only in Korea, I want to go in the rest of the world, I want my prospect consumer to be able to distinguish my products, my services from those of my competitors. So, for instance, what we see in this case, comparing data from USPTO, OHIM, which is the European Office for Trademark, and JPO, is different focus in the different classes that are typically used for trademarking products and services. The other thing, in this case, you see an example that regards France. We linked the data of patents and trademark to firm data level in order to see who patents, who trademarks, who does both, and in which sectors, because behaviors are completely different. And there you go, you find the surprising result that research and development massively utilizes trademarks only, which is something you wouldn't expect. If anything, you would expect them to patent, and that's it. So the third main area of work we are carrying out is within the working parties. I'm responsible for something that is called the Working Party on Industry Analysis, and we have a huge project which goes about innovation, entrepreneurship, and the role of intangibles for growth. What is our key question here is to try and understand the role of small firms, especially young ones, because they seem to be, some studies from the United States, from the census, tell us that they are the real drivers of growth and innovation. So what we are looking at present, and the project will end 2012, is to see whether small and young firms are more likely to introduce high quality and radical patent. Radicalness being a measure of how different you do things from what existed and how big an impact in terms of technology you're going to have in the future. A second group that is very important is the group that has been behind the Oslo Manual, the Canberra Manual, that is the National Expert on Science and Technology Indicators Group, is working on another type of intellectual property, and that's design. Now, this is a very difficult issue because, first of all, it's not very known how business and designers how business account for the design activities. And what they are going to do also is try to understand how design is captured in innovation survey questionnaires, which are almost about the sole harmonized source of information we have. And then the next step will be to make recommendation on how to improve measurement. A very important project that we also have goes to the roots of the problems, and is how knowledge is created, how it's circulated, whether market-mediated, that is through IP, or non-market-mediated, and how it is exploited. So what we are trying to understand is to, first of all, come up with a taxonomy of who are the key agents, what are the key mechanisms, what are the key processes involved, and what are the key results. And then after that, try and quantify them in order to supply policymakers with policy-relevant suggestions. So I leave you this slide so that you can have a look at it, and if you're interested, please contact me, and I will be happy to supply you with more information. Finally, we have a new sources of growth project, which is a very important project across the OECD, and is dealing with especially intangible assets, including intellectual property, under several circumstances. We are going to look at measurement, that is trying to understand how they are evaluated, because despite what can be believed, measuring intangible assets is very hard. And there is a misalignment between economists and financial accountants. And the criteria whereby one can evaluate intangible assets have been different across the world so far, and they keep doing so. So what we are trying to push is to have a critical assessment of how these assets are evaluated and try to come up with estimates that are comparable across countries and over time. This is one key issue for the OECD, and our analyses are never one country based. Our interest is to compare the performance of countries across countries and over time, because what matters is really relative performance. We can't believe that countries might only want to look inward and not compare themselves to the rest of the world. So there will be analysis about the taxation of intellectual assets. A very important issue here, and is big data. That is data that are typically collected when some transactions are carried out. Imagine every time you want to buy with your credit card, or every time you just process your information through Google, there is a trace that you've done so. And this is a massive amount of information which can be used for other purposes. And this has to be done very carefully, actually. Then there is the issue of corporate reporting. There is the issue of competition. Although the issue of competition that was addressed before briefly, it's a very tricky one, because it's well known in the research environment that too little competition is harmful as it is too much competition. There seems to be what technically is called an inverse U relationship. That is, insofar as competition grows a bit, firm performance and economic performance grows. But too much competition leads to decrease in investment in innovation, and this can be harmful for economies. Now, where this threshold is a key question that remains unsolved, and is typically sector-specific and country-specific. So the other thing that, as I said already, we have this knowledge networks and market project, which will convey its result within the New Sources of Growth project. And finally, we have work done about global value chains. We live in a world where our suppliers, possibly from one country, are located in completely other countries, and our transactions take place in locations that differ very much from the location where we take the most part of our operations. So everything that relates to intangible assets has also to be looked at from the point of view of global value chain. So, and with this, I hope I have given you an overview of what our activities, and will be pleased to answer to your emails in case you would like to have more information. Thank you.